Hi there, welcome everyone. Welcome to Surprise Witness, where we talk about Christ-centered, uh, strategic and defense studies, if you want to call it that, right? As well as random downloads that God gives us. Now, something that I want to talk about today is I usually use the daily text that the Jehovah's Witnesses use, just because I feel like it's very consistent and it's very what's the word, organized, right? And so today, Monday, January 29th, the word is thinking ability will keep watch over you, from Proverbs 2:11. Jehovah's law to the nation of Israel included guidelines that would help prevent serious accidents from occurring at home and work. At this time, remember that fatal accidents had serious consequences for unintentional manslayers. And now, obviously, it's it's not in our best interest to ever be in danger, right? But I think this is emphasizing not only just strategy, but mindfulness when we're in dangerous situations. And let me use that as a segue into what battle we're going to be studying today. So today we're going to be studying the Battle of CANNAE, which happened in 215 BC, that included the destruction of the Roman army. Now here is a diagram, and the reason why it's so important or still taught in military academies today is because they use the double envelopment maneuver, in which an inferior force, this is the key word, inferior force is able to defeat a superior one on open ground. Open ground is the key word, right? Now, if y'all want to study along, because I was thinking it would be great if we just like went over these battles together. I'm doing this over the History's Greatest Battles by Nigel Cawthorne. You can find this at Barnes and Noble for like $9. Um, so, and I'm going to read this to you. Mind you, I don't know the copyright or the legalities of it. If YouTube's going to take it down, it's going to take it down. We'll just do something different. Or I'll just write like a summarized report and then we'll go over it after that, right? So the Battle of Cannae, which took place on the 2nd of August, 216 BCE, is still part of the teaching in military academies because it represents the classic double envelopment maneuver in which an inferior force is able to defeat a superior one on open ground. In the 2nd and 3rd centuries BCE, Rome and the North African city of Carthage, near modern Tunis, were rivals for the control of the Western Mediterranean. A dispute over Sicily and Corsica led to the First Punic War, which lasted from 264 BCE to 241 BCE. It is called Punic after the language that the Carthaginians had inherited from their forebears, who came from Phoenicia, which is now Lebanon. In 221 BCE, the 16-year-old Hannibal took command of the Carthaginian forces of the Iberian Peninsula. He then went on a 2-year rampage, taking over the rest of Spain in breach of all the agreements between Rome and Carthage. In 218 BCE, the Romans declared war, the Second Punic War, and demanded that Hannibal be handed over. But Hannibal went on the offensive. He left his brother in command of the armies in Spain and North Africa and headed off across the Pyrenees with 40,000 men and some 40 elephants. Now, by the time he had crossed the Alps, his force was greatly reduced, right? So hang on one second. I was just like trying to figure out the numbers. Okay. He did though have superior cavalry, right? So he got the better of the Roman forces in Ticino River, costing the Romans about 2,000 men. At Tribia, Hannibal killed another 30,000 Romans and their allies, and at Lake Trasimir, he destroyed another 15,000 and also took the life of an important Roman commander. A column of Roman reinforcements was also ambushed, accounting for another 4,000 deaths. Hannibal had cost the Romans some 50,000 troops in just 2 years. His army was now poised to mount an attack on the city of Rome itself. But Hannibal did not attack because Rome still had considerable military resources. If he tried to besiege Rome, he would give the Romans time to recover. Instead, he kept on the move in the hope that some of Rome's Italian allies might come over to the Carthaginian side if he continued his series of victories in the field. In shock from the losses it had sustained, the Senate suspended the republican form of government and put the fate of the city into the hands of a single dictator, Quintius Fabius. With its army and naval power, Rome was bound to win out in the end, Fabius realized, as long as the allies stayed loyal. The Senate authorized the rising of 8 new legions. Another 8 were supplied by the Allies, giving Fabius command of the biggest army Rome had ever put into the field. Fabius went out to find Hannibal once the defenses of Rome had been strengthened, but he refused to engage him. Instead, he just maintained contact, always keeping to the high ground. By this stage, Hannibal was encumbered with prisoners and a great deal of booty, so he could not outrun Fabius. Also, while the Romans had secure supply lines, Hannibal's army survived by foraging, so Fabius harassed Hannibal's foragers. Unable to draw Fabius into battle, Hannibal adopted the tactic of taking over towns that belonged to Rome's allies in Italy. He then killed all the Roman men of military age. The Romans' women and children would be carried off, but the local Italians would be left alone. Hannibal hoped that this would encourage them to defect. However, with a huge Roman army following up behind, few were tempted to go over to the Carthaginian side. They knew what retaliation Fabius would wreak. Although Fabius's strategy was successful, he was mocked with the epithet cunctator, the delayer. Rome wanted action. A Roman dictator was elected to office for just 1 year, and at the end of that time, Fabius was removed. Command of the army was given to Lucius Aemilius Paulus and Caius Terentius Varro, who aimed to give Rome the quick victories to which she was accustomed. On the 2nd of August 216 BCE, the Romans met Hannibal at CANNAE, now Monte di CANNAE, in southern Italy. At around sunrise, the Romans formed up so that their right faced the Affidus River, across from Hannibal's camp. They had 80,000 infantry and 6,000 cavalry. Of the cavalry, 2,000 horsemen, under the command of Paulus, were on the right, while the elite force of 4,000 horsemen, patricians, knights, and their sons were on the left under Varro. The Roman infantry legions were drawn up into a narrow formation in the center under the command of the proconsul called Servilius. The Roman plan was to concentrate the strength of the legions into a narrow front, inflict a hammer blow on the enemy's center, and then break clean through their lines. Now Hannibal was heavily outnumbered, with just 35,000 heavy infantry and a few thousand light infantry and number of slingers. Added to that, his men were largely mercenaries who were paid to fight. However, with 11,000 horse, he enjoyed superior cavalry numbers. Like the Romans, he put his cavalry on the wings. With 7,000 heavy Spanish and Celtic horsemen on the left, under the trusted Hasdrubal, and 4,000 Numidian light cavalry on the right under Maharbal, which was the best cavalry on the field by a large margin. Now, Hannibal put his weakest troops, light infantry from Gaul and Spain, in the center. These were flanked by his African heavy infantry. They would be commanded by Hannibal himself and his younger brother Mago. Despite the reverses the Romans had suffered at the hands of Hannibal, morale was high. The Romans always depended on the strength of their legions to give them the victory, and they could see that Hannibal's forces were outnumbered by 2-1. When Varro's purple cloak was hung out as a signal for battle, said the Greek historian Plutarch, this boldness of the consul and the size of his army, double theirs, must have startled the Carthaginians, but Hannibal commanded them to their arms, and with a small train rode out to take a full prospect of the enemy, as they were now forming in their ranks from a rising ground not far distant. One of his followers, called Gisgo, a Carthaginian of equal rank himself, told him that the numbers of the enemy were astonishing, to which Hannibal replied with a serious countenance, "There is one thing, Gisgo, yet more astonishing, which you take no notice of." And when Gisgo inquired what, he answered that in all those great numbers before us, there is not one man called Gisgo. This unexpected jest of their general made all the company laugh, and they told it to those whom they met, which caused a general laughter amongst them all. Hannibal had some tricks up his sleeves, though. He pushed the weaker Gauls and Spaniards out immediately before the battle, while the stronger Africans were held back, thereby forming the infantry line into an arc. According to the Roman historian Livy, about 500 Numidians pretended to desert just before the battle started. They threw their shields and javelins to the ground and were conducted from the battlefield. However, they had their swords under their robes, and these weapons were suddenly pulled out during the battle. They struck at the Roman rear, causing terrible destruction and even more panic and disorder. The battle began when skirmishers on each side hurled their javelins. Then, on the Carthaginian side, Balearic slingers rained stones and lead shot down upon the Romans. One of those projectiles seems to have hit Paulus on the head, wounding him. Then, with a mighty roar of opposing battle cries, the two armies moved towards one another. The Spanish and Celtic horsemen on Hannibal's left quickly overcame the Roman cavalry, who were first trapped by the river and then slaughtered. Paulus was killed at that stage. Hannibal later honored him by having his body buried with ceremonial rituals. The Numidian cavalry held their own to the right. In the center, Hannibal's light infantry, who were taking the full force of the Roman assault, began to give way. The Romans assumed that this was because of their superior strength, but Hannibal had ordered his men to retreat slowly as if they were being pushed back. The Roman formations, pushing up a slight incline, became compressed, but the African units on either side stood firm, and as the Carthaginian center gave way, the Romans found themselves lured into Hannibal's trap. Having destroyed the cavalry units on the right of the Roman line, Hasdrubal rode around the back of the Roman infantry and attacked the Roman cavalry on the left wing from the rear. Besieged both at the front and the rear, the cavalry took flight. Hasdrubal chased them from the battlefield so that they could play no further part in the action. Among the fleeing cavalrymen was Varus, so the Roman army was now effectively leaderless. By this time, the Roman infantry was so compressed that it could no longer maneuver. All it could do was continue forward, cutting its way through the Spanish and Celtic ranks, which only succeeded in drawing it deeper into the trap. Then, at the critical moment, the African phalanx that had been holding the ends of the Carthaginian line turned inwards to attack the Roman flanks. Returning from the chase, the heavy cavalry under Hasdrubal ran into the back of the Roman formation. The Romans were now completely encircled. They could not maneuver to their flanks or to the rear. Only those on the outside of the formation could fight. In a matter of hours, 50,000 Romans had been slaughtered and another 5,000 had been taken prisoner. Those who escaped were hamstrung and later dispatched. Around 17,000 Romans had managed to break out, and these troops raced back to their fortified camp. However, another 2,000 were killed, and the remaining 15,000 were taken prisoner. Hannibal had lost 6,000 men, 4,000 of whom were Gallic infantrymen, who had the center of the line. Another 1,500 Spanish and African infantrymen had died, along with 500 horsemen. Some 70,000 men lay dead in an area that was around the size of Hyde Park in London or Central Park in New York. The Roman historian Livy described the scene. The morning after, as soon as it was light, they, the Carthaginians, pressed forward to collect their spoils and view the carnage, which was dreadful even to enemies. There lay thousands upon thousands of Romans, foot and horse indiscriminately mingled, as chance had brought them together in the battle or rout. Here and there amid the slain, gory figures whose wounds began to throb with the chill of dawn got up, only to be cut down by their enemies. Some were discovered laying there alive, with thighs and tendons slashed, baring their necks and bidding their conquerors to drain them of their last blood. Others were found with their heads buried in holes in the ground. They had apparently dug these pits themselves and had tried to suffocate themselves by putting earth over their faces. But what drew the attention of all was a Numidian who was dragged out alive from under a dead Roman laying across. His nose and his ears were lacerated, as the Roman, no longer able to hold a weapon in his hand, had expired in a frenzy of rage, tearing at his attacker with his teeth. The gold rings of the Roman knights were collected and later poured onto the floor of the Senate in Carthage. Hannibal allowed to return home all the non-Roman prisoners. His hope being that this would encourage Rome's allies to rebel. Hannibal had inflicted on Rome the largest defeat in its history. His generals now wanted to march on Rome itself, which was now defenseless, but he refused. Maharbal is said to have complained, "Hannibal, you understand how to win battle, but you do not understand how to use your victory." The Romans had been defeated at CANNAE because they relied solely on the superiority of their legionnaires, while Hannibal had employed complex maneuvers that they could not counter. Until CANNAE, Roman tactics had been non-existent. Now they had learned their lesson. CANNAE had made Hannibal master of the Italian peninsula, but the Romans had reverted to the successful tactics of Fabius. Although the victory had brought with it some defections among the Italian states, Hannibal was in no position to defend them. Starved of men and material by the Roman navy that dominated the Mediterranean, Hannibal's forces grew weaker. In 204 BCE, the Roman general Scipio, later Scipio Africanus, attacked Carthage, and Hannibal was forced to return to North Africa in order to defend his homeland. In 202 BCE, Scipio outmaneuvered Hannibal at the Battle of Zama, after which Hannibal went into hiding. When he was eventually cornered in the Bithynian village of Labissa in northern Anatolia in 183 BCE, he poisoned himself rather than be taken. The dictator Quintus Fabius Maximus Cunctator was also the inspiration for the Fabian Society in England, which planned to introduce socialism to the nation by similar gradualist tactics. And here we have an illustration. I find that this is very interesting, right? I find that it's interesting because yesterday I had given that, I guess, the muse thing that I did, right? The one where I was talking about, God gave me this word that our enemies are gonna, face judgment, and we should pray for them, right? And something that I feel like I admire or I like about Hannibal was that he was respectful enough to give a general uh, a good funeral, a ceremonial funeral. And that's really similar to the word that God gave me yesterday. Like, the word is that, yeah, we might have enemies, but we treat those enemies with respect, and we even pray for them, right? Because at the last second, and this is something that a sister that I watch, Bold for Christ, says, right? At the last second, we don't know what those people's last seconds are or last conversations are with God. And it's also a testament that has happened many times, especially in the Bible, right? Where oftentimes the enemy sometimes gets haughty with pride because they believe that their numbers are greater. So who can be against them, right? But when you have good strategy and you have troops that you've built a relationship with, then anything is possible, right? Like the joke that they cracked where they're like, oh yeah, they have all these troops, but no, they don't have you, right? Like, he's highlighting a personal relationship that he has with this individual. And mind you, I haven't looked into who this individual is, or if he was a gifted soldier or whatever, but in our relationship with God, right? We all have a personal relationship with him. And that's something that I feel like the enemy um, underestimates. And it's like, surely, if I have a relationship with God, then would you not believe that the Lord would share with me his wisdom on his strategy to conquer more territory, right? And that's why I say that today's daily text was so awesome, because it's like, yeah, we just need to think about stuff. The ability to think will keep watch over you. And we benefit so much from being a part of God's kingdom, because not only do we have our own thinking ability, which lean not on your own understanding, right? But we have the wisdom of God to help us win our battles. And I don't know. I just think that's cool. So I don't know if you're interested. Go ahead and look up the Battle of Cannae. There are some um, diagrams of it on Google. I'll post the one that I used. And if you want to go ahead and read the book, I'll go ahead and post the link to that. And I don't know, reflect on it, reflect on strategic studies. And perhaps is there a time where you attacked a target using strategy and you were greatly outnumbered? Share the story in the comments below. And I'm looking forward to it.